Welcome all to the Scoping Projects with Design Thinking and Root Cause Analysis to Inform Problem Framing webinar as part of the 2020 EPIC-N free webinar and event series. My name is Marshall Curry, and I'm the EPIC-N Program Manager, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. Before we get underway, though, I'd like to introduce our organization and this program and its programming. The Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities Network, or the EPIC Network, or EPIC-N for even shorter, is the nonprofit association of higher education institutions that adopt the award-winning EPIC model to facilitate high-impact, large-scale university, local government, community partnerships. EPIC-N supports autonomous university programs across the globe that connect their local city, county, and community groups with the human capital of their universities to improve the quality of life for all involved. This happens, again, they're an autonomous program, so they're all different, and you're going to hear from Gavin Luter from the University of Wisconsin talk about his program. These webinars are facilitated by the following funders. Our member programs are individual universities who have contributed to EPIC Network existing, and we're very grateful for their work on the ground, as well as their support for a nonprofit association at the international level. We also want to thank the Ford Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. These webinars that they're helping provide are facilitated by our presenters who are planning to be at our in-person conference at the Indiana University Bloomington, but are instead, because of COVID-19 and its impacts, are going above and beyond the call of duty to put together these presentations in a time when they're should be probably focused somewhere else, but we really appreciate them focusing on the network. They're preparing these works or these presentations in hopes that you all who are joining and other university and community leaders will find resources that they can use to help catalyze programs and partnerships and whatever might come up in your local community and to help in the response and recovery to this pandemic. Anyone can attend the live tapings that are a part of this series, and you can anyone also can review the recordings that will be posted on the 2020 EPIC-N webinar series schedule. Really appreciate you all joining again, and I am going to introduce our speaker for today. Gavin Luter is the Managing Director of the University Alliance, a network of leaders at University of Wisconsin-Madison, serving as the front door for local governments who want to leverage teaching, research, and service to improve their communities. Gavin's expertise is in developing and growing university community partnerships, and he has created models and frameworks about how to achieve sustainable, equitable, and democratic partnerships. He carries a special interest in K-12 partnerships, and he received his doctoral degree in educational administration from University at Buffalo, where he ran a university community partnership in the Fruit Belt and Commodore Perry neighborhoods. Finally, on a personal note, he has been a crucial thought leader in many ways for the EPIC Network, and I'm personally grateful for his continued efforts. With that, I'm going to introduce one last thing. This is just a general look at his program, and I'll let him kind of jump in here to talk about his program stats maybe a little bit, and then we'll get him on his way into the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. We are housed at a Think and Do tank on campus that's technically in the Department of Sociology, but kind of brands itself as working on its own. But we've worked with cities to advance sustainability, equity, and democracy, so it was a kind of a natural fit. Our program was established in 2016 after the Alliance coming together in 2015, which I'll explain a little bit more. We have a 3-year partnership. I'll explain more about that. We typically take on about 25 projects per year, somewhere between 3 to 7 cluster areas. So they're kind of clustered by theme. We have about 2 average full-time staff members working with us, myself, a program manager, and we have various admin folks who work with us to keep the project running. We, of course, provide all the local government partners with some kind of final deliverables. Usually we take the student reports and the presentations, we do some light editing and formatting and essentially turn them over to the local government partners so we can get them in their hands ASAP. One thing that I'm really proud of about our program is that we have a diversified funding source. It's made up of about 20% in-kind contributions from people around the university that's donating staff time, typically. We do have some donations from private funders and alumni. We have gotten some grants internally, mostly internal university grants. We do also get contributions from local governments who pay to be affiliated with the program. So that's the large communities and small communities. And then other little funding sources here and there that we get kicked in from other departments, and a little bit of private philanthropy donations as well, not just individual alumni. So we have a pretty diversified funding source, and I'm really, really happy about that. It allows us to not be overly reliant on one, and it's helped to be thinking about our business model in that diversified portfolio way. So yeah, that's a little bit more about the program. And just kind of fair warning, I'm not going to be describing in a lot of detail our program. I'm specifically going to be talking about the problem scoping. So if you want to learn more about our program, feel free to follow up with me. I'm actually doing a presentation for the Association of Advancing Research in Society next week. So if you want to come to another virtual conference, I'll be talking about our program in more detail. But Marshall, should I?
Just one other quick thing, and then I'll let you go. The inspiration for this slide for a lot of you newcomers is that previous events, when we have our programs do presentations, there's a lot of questions of, well, what does your program look like underneath the hood? And so we decided to just do that up front in all of our presentations during this webinar series to give you a quick snapshot of the positionality of all the different programs, because they vary a lot. We have a lot of programs in small liberal arts colleges. We have a lot of programs in big research centers or in big research institutions. Some of our programs have an average of 5 to 10 projects a year. All of that is great. None of those things are outside of the EPIC model. And so for the newcomers, I just wanted to kind of give a little disclaimer about the slide, and I'll hand it over to Gavin, and let's get to it.
Okay, I need to share my screen, Marshall.
Yep, and we'll be underway.
And I think you all should be able to see my slides, I hope.
Good.
Okay. All right, welcome again, everyone. Thanks a lot for taking your time out of the day. I wanted to give a little background first. You can't understand the University Year program without understanding the fact that we have the University Alliance, which is essentially a network of leaders on campus who care deeply about the future of urban areas and regions that also connect rural and urban areas. So we've built an advisory board, almost like the WHO on campus wants to work with local governments. As you can see from this slide, it is a variety of people from the Institute for Research on Poverty, the School of Education to Extension, as well as the School of Medicine and Public Health, Computer Science, Cartography Lab, really a diverse group of folks who come together, and we meet bi-monthly, and they help us figure out how to better connect with local governments and what things that they're doing that are relevant to cities and local governments in general. We do have a leadership structure, 2 staff members, myself and Kelly Roop, who staff the Alliance and the University Year program. And then we also have 3 co-chairs. And again, you can see the diversity where they come from. We have a woman who's with the Global Health Institute and the Women's Wellbeing in Wisconsin and the World is one of our co-chairs. We also have a dean, and then we also have director of a center who is essentially also a professor of sociology, public affairs, political science. These people help guide us in our work, and I report directly to them. Joe Rogers is technically my supervisor, but I consider them a leadership team, and they all give me guidance and direction. So that's just a little bit on our end about how we're structured. I'm just briefly going to talk about the goals of the University Year program. We realize that local governments oftentimes are dealing with big, hugely scoped challenges. They don't always have the capacity and bandwidth to deal with them. They want people to work with who can kick around ideas and help them workshop different solutions. And we know that they're really committed. I mean, they've run for a public office and they're giving up how many times per week to go to meetings, and they're going to the grocery store with their constituents. So they're really, really committed. In higher education, we have a bunch of experts that are siloed. who really need real world experience and training for their students. They want their scholarship and work to make an impact. And we also have a bunch of people on campus who are willing to ask questions, really informed questions, and sometimes really just the naive outsider questions. They're not afraid to ask those kinds of questions. So that's what led us to put together a formal way for local governments to connect with University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that's why we were grateful to find the EPIC network to give us some kind of better structure and way to talk about what we're doing. We do want to accelerate innovation at the local level. We of course feel like the next generation are not being trained as well as they could, so we want to accelerate that for their participation in the workforce and other leadership positions in their lives, maybe public service. And then we also know that communities and local governments have a lot to share, and we want to be able to learn from them and honor that and put that in the minds of our students moving forward. So we spend a lot of time with local governments scoping out problems that they need some assistance with. And there's just one, it's another set of eyes to come and help them think through some things. So when it comes time for them to put out challenges and issues that they want to work on, before we had a better structure, local governments were just coming to us and throwing out random ideas. There was one year where we got over 100 projects pitched to us from 7 different localities. They weren't necessarily clear about why they were struggling with those issues. They just knew that they were struggling with them. They didn't know when we said, okay, well, what can we produce for you in a semester or an academic year? They weren't necessarily always 100% able to answer that question easily. And then finally, something that I think a lot of university folks on the call can probably identify with, the questions that local government practitioners might be asking don't always align very nicely with how faculty might think about projects and how they define research questions. So research questions and practical questions do not always align nicely. So that led us to want to come up with a better way that we can get at how local governments are thinking about problems and how we're framing solutions for them. So this is the first interactive part here. What essentially I'm going to do with this scenario here, and this is a real world scenario. One of our local government partners came to us and broadly said, hey, we want you to, this is a very serious thing. They said, we want you to help us restore optimism to our community because we feel like we have a lot of issues and challenges and we don't really feel optimistic about moving forward. So this is what they put on their application for health, okay? So essentially what I want to do in small breakout groups, and Marshall is gonna help doing this, the spirit of size is, if you were handed this challenge, what would you all do to get at the specific projects in this? What process would you follow? What kinds of questions would you ask them? Yeah, that's what we want you to discuss and do a quick share out. I think part of the reason why I put that to you all is because this is the kind of stuff that we get handed with communities. I'm glad Bonnie's on the call because Bonnie actually saw part of this process unfold in one of our communities. So our model, we have a 3-year 4-step process where we spend about a year getting to know the community partners and understanding what they need from us. And then we spend a year doing the actual reports and deliverables. And then we spend also a year doing follow-up and implementation support with them. And I can talk a little bit more about those later on in the question and answer period. But in particular, we realized that the year 1 we needed more time to dig in deeper to some of these issues and spend more time getting to know what exactly they wanted from us. So after the before, when they were just throwing out random ideas, the after this more formalized process, we realized we needed to develop and dig in to find out what exactly folks wanted. So we developed a detailed problem scoping process for folks. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the motivation behind it, where it came from, and then I'm going to walk you through exactly what we do. So again, really happy to hear that the root cause analysis came up because I think communities are not taking as much time as maybe they could to really figure out why is this problem happening. And so we felt like it was kind of our duty to help them stop, think, pause, and say, okay, yes, there are more, there are more car accidents, or, there's more maternal child health issues, but why? And so that kind of five why questions, and trying to figure out what is the problem, what are the symptoms, how do you kind of disentangle the problems from the symptoms and potential causal factors. And even there are some cases where communication is really the underlying issue. We already have something that can address this, but people just might not know about it. So it allows you to really pull apart those things. So that was one of the main motivations for what I'm about to show you. And I'm not by any means an expert in design thinking, but having gone through some trainings, we do need to be developing a deeper understanding of the challenge and trying to empathize with where our communities are coming from. They need more help in clearly articulating the problem that they want to solve. And they need help to brainstorm potential solutions and ideate. And that just so happens that it's the first 3 steps of the design thinking process. We might be able to eventually help them prototype and test, but they need more help in defining exactly the problem and figuring out ways that they might be able to address those underlying issues. So just as a practical tool, one of the reasons why I love the EPIC-N group is because they're all about, let's get practical tools in the hands of people who are doing this work. So we developed what we call a pre-engagement workbook. So before we even start defining actual issues, you need to understand what exactly it's going to be like to work with us. This just gives you, our example of what we've done. We tell them exactly what to expect, who we are, how to engage with stakeholders in defining projects. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to specifically address and call out in this pre-engagement workbook. And we have a couple of guiding questions that we developed. So the first one was around stakeholders. I wanted to showcase that. Who are your stakeholders and who should be informed about our partnership? Should we meet with these stakeholders? Are there any voices that need to be a part of the discussion before the project launches? This is also in the name of getting the people who are most affected at the table, because when local governments come to us, say it's a county administrator or a city manager or a mayor, they're oftentimes just thinking about developing the project only in terms of their own city staff or county staff. So, and we feel like, if there's an issue around health, there are a lot more stakeholders that need to be at the table than just public sector folks. So we found that the best problem solving and ideation and defining projects comes when you actually have stakeholders in the room, which is of course not, magic or, rocket science or anything like that. But it just so happens that a lot of local governments feel rushed. So it's like, yeah, here, just take this. And we're saying, no, slow down. Let's take a year. Let's get people at the table that need to be at the table. And then with defining projects, these are just a couple of, in a sense, they're our version of drilling down the 5 whys in a way, but it's framing these questions differently. So how will the project advance long-term goals? What do you think success actually looks like? Down to what have you already tried? Why is it important to work on the project now? And this gets them to stop and think like, okay, who else should be not only at the table, but why are we asking this project? What have we tried and what's failed? Again, this is another version of asking people why 5 times, but framing it in a different way instead of just saying, well, why? We're helping them think differently about framing the why in their projects. So this was the pre-engagement workbook, and this is kind of the quote unquote homework that the local government partners have to do in this case. And in some cases, that work is enough for them to eventually come up with a project description form. In other cases, they feel like they need more. They need to go even farther. So what we defined, and this is where Bonnie, I'm glad that Bonnie's on the call because she actually saw this unfold with one of our community partners. We created a scoping event, essentially. So it was about a 3-4 hour period of time where we got a bunch of stakeholders in the room, and we had a guided set of activities. Glad Travis mentioned the strategic doing, because we did pull a lot of what you're about to hear from the Pathfinder project defining process, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that is. But it is a guided activity to eventually end up with project description forms. When I had that meeting with that one particular county, they said, well, Gavin, what's the goal of the meeting? I said, the goal is to get at least 15 projects defined before we leave here tonight. And Bonnie knows that I was not going to let them out of the room until I had 15 individual project forms that got at some of the root causes of what exactly they were dealing with. So I'm going to walk you through what exactly is involved in that scoping process at this point. So first of all, we started off with a vision for your community. This is really based on appreciative inquiry. Consider an issue that could be changed, and then start with an imagine if. What would it look like if my community had fewer, childhood deaths, or had lower smoking rates? What would it look like? What would we be able to do if our community had, lower, statistics around this or higher statistics around that? So we asked them to take about 5 minutes, and each individual person around the table did this, and then they shared out with each other. The next process or the next activity that we had them do was around asset sharing, and it intentionally had them think about what assets they had in the community. So again, really in line with the asset-based community development framework. And then quite explicitly, who owns that particular asset? The asset, of course, does not have to only be money. The community really wanted me to put in parentheses here, it says assets, talent, skills, abilities, relationships, connections, potential resources, even networks of people that you have connections with. Those could be assets. And then brainstorm at the table. So we had that very explicit, so they knew what assets they were dealing with. And then we start to think about leveraging and linking assets toward opportunities. So we try to take that, the vision of your particular community that you wanted, the assets that you have, what could be a particular opportunity. So we even gave them this particular example of, what if we could, somebody had the farmers market was a great network that could be tapped into in terms of an asset. And they wanted better food access. So what would it look like? Here's an opportunity. A farmer's market will host second Saturday events that will attract folk vendors in the market in order to get more visitors downtown. So they're trying to link this food security and access also with downtown redevelopment. That's just the example that we gave them. That's all I'm saying here. So then they came up with these different opportunities themselves. And then we had them flesh those out in identifying discrete strategic opportunities. This essentially, through their table, we wanted them to at least have 5 discrete opportunities with 5 very clear descriptions that build on their assets and take advantage of those opportunities. And then the next part that we had them do was assessing impact and ease. And this is where, in some cases, some of the places that, or some of the tables that we had came up with 20 ideas. And while that's great, we can't do 20 projects just in one thematic area. So we tried to have them narrow them down to evaluate the opportunity and potential barriers. And then we had them literally just score on 1 to 5. How impactful do you think this is? And how easy or how difficult it is. It doesn't mean that you have, just because something's easy and we should do it. You also need to be balancing in the impact. And just because something's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just gave them an opportunity to really do a sober assessment of how easy and how impactful things are. I wanted to go back to our example around restoring optimism. And this is an actual picture of the meeting that we had in this one particular community. We were able, sorry, there's like a chat coming in. I want to make sure that Marshall's not telling me to shut up or something. Okay.
No, you're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Thanks, Lori. Sorry you have to leave. I just wanted to make sure that you all understand that this process, as intimidating as it might sound, it worked within a 3-hour process. And actually that health table, that's the health table actually, they came up with 17 different projects. everything from improving communications planning across their departments, to thinking about a better social media campaign to reduce stigma of people who have mental health, to improving health equity awareness, because they realized that health equity was not something that they talked about very openly in their community. Again, that's a root cause. Like, we don't talk about health equity, so people don't see themselves as part of the picture. So we need to be talking more, explicitly about that. They also realized that they needed a mental health resource road mapping. All I'm giving you is examples of different projects that people came up with when they were asked to stop, pause, think about the why and about what specifically they could get out of this particular initiative. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear in saying this is only one way to go about scoping projects. And what I'm actually really eager to hear about is if you all have any thoughts or feedback or suggestions, and we'll get to that in the discussion. This is my contact information, a little bit more about the University Year program, so you could find out a little bit more about us. And then the discussion questions really are in that spirit of how would you improve the process? How would you handle ambiguity with community partners? Because this is just, we developed this because we had to. Partners were coming to us with really ambiguous things, and we had to put something together. And this was based on these different frameworks that we've seen. And we think that we found a model that works for us right now, but it's certainly not the end all be all. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Marshall.
Great. Thanks, Gavin. Let's all give a round of applause to Gavin, either muted virtually or use the reactions button in the Zoom. You can, yeah, some people
Only if you think I
know.
deserve it. Don't just give me an applause because you think I need to.
He needs it. And we really appreciate your time and effort. And I think that a lot of the material is really meaningful for us as we think about how do we meet local governments and local communities where they're at. So with that, I've got a couple notes from EPIC-N, and then we are going to hand it off back to you all for Q&A and discussion. So thank you again, Gavin. We want you to be able to continue discussion. So we've got a feedback link. I'll put it in the chat box for the presentation. We really want you to do a shout out to Gavin for his time and effort by doing a social media post, use this hashtag. And then you'll get a link to the recording and all of the resources that will be hyperlinked to this PDF of the slideshow. It'll go on to our events page, and you can look up more of our events that are upcoming on our website. And we'll have these are some of the resources we'll put in. Gavin mentioned the pre-engagement workbook. We'll give you a link to that, and also some other resources that came up during our call. This has been a part of our webinar series, and I'm going to turn it over now for you all to have your discussion / Q&A. So Gavin, do you want to actually bring up that discussion slide, or do you want to open it to questions first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just put it up there, but people can feel free to throw it out there.
And yeah, let's, as best we can, let's try and get short thoughts together so that we can hear a lot of people in the room as you're answering questions.
There were a couple of like little quick questions that I saw appear. Alice asked me, is there a geographical area limit to our projects? No, other than the state of Wisconsin. We can do anything across the state of Wisconsin. Our furthest away engagement this year is about 4-hour drive away from Madison, and that's in Egg Harbor, Wisconsin. So that was one question that I saw. I didn't know if there are any other quick ones that you remember, Marshall.
No, I think if anyone had any that we missed, feel free to just unmute and ask Gavin.
I have a quick question. This is Guillermo Mazier. My background is with cities, so I work helping cities come up with community innovation projects, in a lot of cases in partnership with universities. And my question for you all is, what is the way that you're tracking like the effectiveness of the impact that you had? So, doing a project is great because having worked for a lot of cities, they either want a few things. They want more people, like resources, and they want money, they want research, and they want these particular things. And universities are, depending on where you're located, generally do a good job of providing support, but making sure that support is tied back with like some version of measurable impact. Where are you guys putting like, hey, here's the impact that this project had on this community, and when in your process are you coming up with those particular metrics or metrics that you would like to achieve, knowing that this is a new project whose metrics could ultimately change later on?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty open discussion about metrics when we're scoping problems to make sure that they know that this is what ultimately they want. And more often than not, I know it sounds kind of weird, more often than not, we cannot come in and do something that's totally going to change those metrics. You saw the health things that people wanted to change. They wanted to change their county health rankings, all that kind of stuff. They're not going to see that change over a year or two with us. What essentially, and I know this might sound like crass, and I'm not trying to be like a smart ass or anything like that. Communities want, they want something that will allow them to keep the momentum on these issues that are important for them, if that makes sense. So their main metric is like, do we provide them with something that is helpful to their, like, trying to move the ball down the field with this or not? So we've developed an evaluation process right after we ask community partners, like, look, were there any immediate impacts that came from this? And sometimes they'll say, we created a policy committee on our city council that we didn't have before. Or, oh my gosh, I was able to respond to an RFP from a business, and I couldn't do that before I had your tool in my hand. Or we applied for a grant based on this. They don't know what those things are and necessarily until they get down the field, until they know what they're actually getting. And then about a year, 2, maybe 3 afterwards, we also walk them through what's called the ripple effects mapping process. And if you're looking for good resources around that, it's ripple effects mapping. I think University of Minnesota is the one who originally, their extension service is the one who did that. But it's essentially a guided activity to think about which project you did and what ripples were caused by doing that project. And sometimes that's like, oh my gosh, we ended up hiring an extra Native person because we wanted to do something around Native American awareness. We ended up adding somebody to our committee. They didn't necessarily know they needed that up front, so they couldn't have defined that metric. But as they kept the conversation going in their local governments, they realized, like, oh, that made us realize we need to do a better job of having representation on our committee. I know it's a really long, kind of windy answer, but I hope it gets at the spirit of your question.
Yeah, I'll check out the ripple effects mapping. I know that a lot of times governments confuse movement with action. And I think what I've seen in this process is, hey, we want to be able to provide as much actionable help as we possibly can. And I wanted to make sure that I understood how you guys were looking at the impacts of your work, and I got that answer. So thank you.
Yeah. Cool. And Guillermo, we can double back and talk about all the different projects from around the network who may have more of an action-focused project. But I'm going to hand it over to the next person. Jordan Catcher has a question. Gavin.
Okay, is Jordan going to ask it?
I thought so. She has her hand raised. Maybe it's applause.
Oh no, it was just, yeah, it was an applause.
Wah, wah, wah. Sorry, my bad.
No worries.
Okay, next person.
I saw Alice ask a question about, do we work on climate change and legislation, or do we work on local government issues? Yeah, I mean, sometimes we work directly on climate change stuff. I mean, Milwaukee County just asked us to figure out how climate change, equity, and health are interconnected in some of their lower income neighborhoods. And so we were asked specifically to do a project around that. And it may have impacts on county policy. It may have impacts on state policy. Also, we have been indirectly asked to work on climate change by virtue of working on issues like flooding. and more intense flooding events and how we can prevent flooding. So some of the smaller communities that we're dealing with are asking about projects that have been caused by climate change, but not directly because it's just not in their vernacular. That's not part of their public discussion. So yes, we've worked on issues of climate change, and yes, there might be some policy implications that come from it. For instance, the hazard mitigation plans, we've worked on projects around flood mitigation, and that is, I mean, climate change is pretty explicitly called out in some people's hazard mitigation plans, so that becomes an administrative practice, maybe not a policy. But yes, so the answer is yes.
Hey, Gavin, this is Travis, University of Iowa. You guys do such fantastic work, and I'm always looking to you and a lot of other Epic End programs for really good ideas. And I'm pretty excited that I'm actually working through the process for getting certified to do the type of meeting, the strategic doing that you just described. And I think it's really an effective way to do that. We're kind of in a position where we don't have the luxury of taking a year to develop projects. In fact, I'm talking to one of our brand new partners that for next year, I'm talking to her at 3 o'clock about projects, but we're starting in August. So we don't have the full year. We're actually gonna have projects that start then. So while I think this will probably still be an important part of our process, like there are some things that we've been able to do in the past that kind of help point toward very specific things. We've been around for 10 years, so we do have kind of a bank of experience and project examples that, you know, we actually know that there's like transferable types of projects, and that communities are often facing similar issues. So we can say, look at these projects that we've done in the past. Does this make sense for you? And that also kind of helps us align the project ideas with the actual capabilities that we know that we have, where we know that we can do well. So so we're really now, our program really now is built around core faculty partners and courses that kind of have been perennial partners, and so we articulate like what they're capable of as much as we want to make sure that we aren't what we have to offer kind of matches what the community needs are. So it's kind of a two-way street in that way. In the past, we've shared things like, I don't know how many people used it, but we've helped communities with the STAR community rating system, and just in terms of sustainability metrics, we've said, we're not saying that you have to get certified, but take a look at the ways that they measure metrics and think about how those might like inspire some project ideas. So there's some ways to, I think, to kind of like point to some kind of quick, ideas just based on, what's been done in the past, maybe if people have that access to that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Travis. And I think, we've done that before, in that we've said like, hey, we worked on this issue last year. And it just seemed, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's Wisconsin, maybe it's just particular communities that we've worked on. Everybody needs to see it in their own name. Everybody needs to go through their own process. And so those have not been particularly effective for us. It helps get their mind going, and it helps them see, oh, here's what we can do. They want it done for them,
Yeah, I think the ones that I think mostly that applies to the most are, we work with civil environmental engineering department, and it's pretty easy to say, like, let's have a catalyst project in a downtown building that has been underutilized for decades, right? So stuff like that's a little bit easier than kind of this like health outcomes.
Right. There's another question I think I saw here.
From Alice, yeah.
From Alice about private sector being locked out or not supporting these kinds of processes. How do we get practitioners as part of the solution? I mean, we have always been open to working with, people from outside the university. In fact, I had somebody who used to do consulting come and work with us on one of our projects. I think we're fine doing those things. I think the difficulty comes in when, or if the private sector person wants to get paid as a part of this. I mean, we're running on student labor, and we're not really getting even paid what what it's actually worth that our students are putting out there. But we know that not all communities are able to pay equally. So that's in part why we exist, is because we're heavily subsidized and we can do that. But that's where the tension point comes in. So as long as a private sector consultant is willing to have that very open conversation and say, look, we're not even paying our faculty extra to do these projects. They're teaching existing courses. Students aren't getting paid either. So if you're willing to work within that kind of framework, the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department actually is a great example. I'm glad Travis brought it up, because they work private sector mentors into all of their capstone projects. So they have a volunteer mentor who is willing to kind of guide the students. So say it's a solar energy project, they'll have somebody who's in the solar energy arena and work with them throughout the entire semester on that particular project. So I would love it if more capstone people were to engage private sector folks. I think there's definitely a way to do it. And I mean, I wanted to work with a private sector consultant one time on its, a compensation study. And he was like, why the hell do you think I'm going to share my data with you? It's proprietary. Get out. Like, you don't want anything to do with us. So, I mean, I've even reached out, and sometimes they lock us out because they're worried about working with the university. And if it's a public university, then their proprietary stuff becomes public. I don't know. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to navigate, but we handle it on a case-by-case basis.
We have other programs to add some Epic Network. Other programs that I've heard from across the network have shared that they'll bring them in as like a mentor, as kind of noted, where they aren't actually engaging the project, but it's like very known that they're kind of giving advice to the students and the faculty as kind of a mentor or like in-kind donation type of a role. And then that way the community partner kind of knows that person. Sometimes the mentor will use it as a recruitment tool for future employees, because they start to meet the students. So there's a lot of ways to kind of get the carrot, depending how you need it to be peeled or cooked. But I think some of our programs are starting to figure that out. And in general, our guidance to a lot of these university programs is you don't want to be working in opposition to private sector. You want to be doing kind of as Gavin just listed, you want to be trying to engage and bring the community to bear on these problems that are being brought up. And in order to do that, we need to be working collaboratively, and we don't want to be talking about do this instead of a consultant. It's like we're going to bring everyone to the table and try and figure it out.
And oftentimes I think those things, I hate to say it, like they kind of work themselves out. Once word, especially if we worked in a community of 67 people this last year. And when UW-Madison comes to town and starts talking about stormwater stuff, the entire freaking community found out about it. And then this landscape architect comes up and he's like, hey, I work in the private sector. Would you mind if I like kind of listen in on stuff? We're like, yeah, totally. He also is an adjunct professor at University of Minnesota, because we were doing work in that part of the state that was close to Minnesota. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say it's like not a problem. It definitely is a tension point. But if you approach it from a human standpoint and just say like, we all want the same thing, then those challenges can be navigated.
Yeah, and I think, coming from having worked in the public sector and private sector, it's communicating, like setting clear expectations and trying to find the win-win solutions. So like, the private sector says, hey, if we can leverage your research with my knowledge, we can provide an offering that, then can be used to create more impact elsewhere. But I think that's a great point.
Great. Any other questions? I don't know where we are in time. Oh, we're almost at about time. Is that right?
Yeah, I was about to wrap us up in about 5 minutes, depending on questions and things. A little early, but we can also continue the discussion. I know Gavin was looking for some feedback on his notes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very eager. Like, if people have critiques or you might want to look at this resource, I mean, that's just as much a reason why I'm doing the presentation as it is to share what we're doing.
So I'll go. first of all, I thought it was great. I think the critique that I'd give, well, first I'd start with the process documentation that you have is the foundation probably for your success. And I think that's awesome that you have, hey, we have a process that we have an intake form and we go from here to here to here. I think there's an opportunity, you know, if you want to introduce design thinking to the process, to find ways to accelerate the collaboration and creativity in the problem shaping process, and get somebody to, you know, to actually write out what the problem statement is in a really clear, structured, way that everybody knows, you know, what it is, what it's intended to achieve, where it's going. And I think in the design of the project that you guys are going to do, whether it's the Catalyst project or a Pathfinder project, help the community client come up with those metrics or outcomes themselves, like what they want to achieve or accomplish as part of that process. Because as you mentioned before, they don't know what they should be measuring, and sometimes those metrics are already there. But I think within the university structure, there tends to be more of a, which is a good thing and sometimes a bad thing, but more of a more rigid process. And I think if you can maybe think outside the box, both in terms of the metrics or the outcomes that you want to impact, and empower the communities to do the same, however hard that may be, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then the last potential opportunity is, would there ever be any way to commercialize any of the projects that are done through the university? Because as these projects come up, whether it's coming up with new software, the students have incredible skills and incredible ideas, and the professors have the same. And so in economic development, the concept of, you know, commercialization or tech transfer in particular are big economic drivers for a community. So if there's ever any opportunity for commercialization based on the projects that you have, that could be a checklist, you know, that people go through. Is there an opportunity to commercialize X project? But beyond that, I thought you did a great job, Gavin, and I look forward to learning more about some of the things that you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I appreciate that. And we have not had as many opportunities for tech transfer and commercialization, but I think Marshall might even know some examples of people who have done like Creative Commons licenses and things like that. Like, we're actually putting together an app this year for a historical walking tour in one of our communities. So I think there could be opportunities for things like that. But it hasn't come up as much. I think I saw, did Dunbar take himself off mute? Want to ask a question?
Well, I was going to emphasize what Guillermo had said about the commercialization possibilities. And in our I-Corps program, often we're starting with faculty or student ideas, but we don't often have a very good understanding of the community marketplace. And so I see some really interesting fit here, hearing what the community pain points are. And then I could see there would be times when there'd be commercial opportunities that would come from that fusion. So just seconding that.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that part of the benefit of having, I mean, I would say anybody who's going to be doing an EPIC program should try to build a campus-wide network of people who get to know you from across campus. So we have the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, which is the one who really drives a lot of our tech transfer initiatives. They're like, one of our professors just got named as a WERF professorship. So they're at the table and they know about us. And so they're always appraised of the project. So if there comes to be somewhat like some project that could be a really good fit for tech transfer or commercialization, that could, you know, we can tap those folks. But you're right, there's a lot of potential, I think.
Well, thanks again all for joining. I'm gonna just close out the recording piece. So if you'd like to join to continue the conversation, feel free. But thanks for joining the this webinar series and Gavin's presentation on project scoping. I really appreciate your attendance. And again, I'm just going to stop recording, and you can look to our website for more information about future events. I know some questions that came up have to do with some other topics that will be addressed in future conversations. For example, on April 28th, Joel Rogers will be presenting about ways to bring in policy into these projects and how you start thinking about doing policy type moves with local government. So do be on the lookout for that. But thank you all for attending.